compensatory education. I don't think I need that, Karen. I mean, we're doing great. We're probably not going to need that. And we're just so glad school's starting again. And I hear you. I am so glad that school's starting again too. However, so many of my families and so many families of the kids with 6 million kids with disabilities in America, I'm afraid are going to get gypped on compensatory education consideration and how meaningful that is and what benefit it has. So if we haven't met, I am Karen Mayer Cunningham, Special Education Boss, helping families navigate and negotiate the IEP process. And so tonight we're in part 3 of 4, compensatory education. Tonight's we're going to talk about the really important points that I want you guys to remember when we get back to the table. And what I want you to remember is this is about your child. This is individualized, and each of them are a case-by-case basis. So usually when compensatory time is delivered to a family with a child with a disability, it's at a result of a filing. And those could be a state written complaint, a mediation, a due process hearing, a resolution session, or an Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education filing. And I get those many times during my filings. So it's not unusual for the courts or the officers or people in the IEP process to agree to compensatory education. Obviously, we've never had a pandemic. So let's talk about what that looks like and what it could be for your kiddo. Remember, the point of compensatory education, is to put the student in the position he would have occupied had there not been an IDEA violation. Had there not been an IDE violation. What are the IDEA violations? That FAPE wasn't delivered. It couldn't have been delivered. It wouldn't matter how amazing your remote learning was, FAPE wasn't delivered. That being said, there will be some kiddos, they don't need compensatory education. Parents filled in, they got private tutors, kiddos did great at home. And there are some kiddos that are going to need compensatory education. And before you just sweep it away and say, I'm good, we don't need that, I want you to know what it is. So let's talk about that. So compensatory education, these are the points that I really want you to remember. We're going to get you a handout tomorrow night. Who doesn't like a handout? Is that not a handout, but a handout? Okay? You guys live for a handout, don't you? So here's the 3 points I want you to remember. Number 1, this is really important, and this is under questions and answers on providing services to children with disabilities during the coronavirus disease 2019 outbreak from the U.S. Department of Education. So compensatory education must be individualized to each student. So what does that mean? It means the IEP, you guys know what IEP stands for? Anybody? Stands for Individualized Education Plan? No. It stands for I Expect Progress. So we're going to look at what was his expected rate of progress, where was he going to land if he had those that last grading period, 10 weeks of school, and where would he have landed? And where is he now? How much gap is there? The U.S. Department of Education emphasizes that if a student with a disability misses school as a result of result of an extended school closure, districts must make an individualized determination whether and to what extent compensatory services may be needed, consistent with applicable requirements, including to make up for any skills that may have been lost. While templates and formulas may assist teams in documenting their determination regarding services, it's really important to remember each student is unique. No student is the same. If you have a 12-year-old with autism and a speech impairment, and your neighbor has a 12-year-old with autism and speech impairment, what they would need as compensatory education wouldn't be the same. If it's the same, not individualized. So if your school is saying, oh, this is what we're going to do for comp ed, these are individuals. Your child is an individual. So it must be individualized, whether you're on a 504 or an IEP. Number 2, the amount of compensatory education each student needs may not necessarily be hour for hour, minute for minute, and it actually may be more. There's lots of case law that supports more, depending on how long it went, what the impact is. Again, I have kiddos that have actually moved ahead, and I have kiddos that have regressed a decade. So again, that's something that you're going to have to look at on a case-by-case basis. And then last but not least, number 3, an IEP and 504 team should consider whether and how a student made progress. Whether and how. Did he make progress? How did he make progress? So if he made progress, you're going to be able to tell me how. Maybe that be because he actually got individualized instruction from his parent or a tutor or whoever. So who's going to have the data? Raise your hand if you're going to have data. All my data keepers. Yes, yes, yes. You have the data. Going forward, since you're going to be the special education boss, you need to always have the data. You need to be able to drive the train. You need to have the most data of anybody there. So we're going to talk about kind of how we know what those compensatory plans have been in the past. So I do a lot of mediation. I'm in a state where they allow advocates to represent families with a considerable knowledge of special education. And we're allowed to represent them at mediation. We're allowed to represent them in due process hearings and all the things. And so when I am working with a family, I don't just go, oh, we'd like 10 million hours. We don't want it to be punitive. We don't want it to hurt the student. And we want it to have a meaningful benefit, right? Meaningful benefit and harmful effect. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to your state's education agency. And on that, every state has their education agency. It's either an LEA or an SEA. It's either a local education agency or a state education agency, right? So they will list reporting requirements for the state. Part of the reporting requirements for each state is they self-report. That's a good idea, isn't it? Sort of like if my doctor asked me how much I weighed, I'm like 110, right? So sometimes a self-report's good, sometimes it's not. So if you go to your state's website, you can see most of them are for 10 years back. So if you go to our website, Texas Education Agency, you can look up due process hearings. So usually in our state, on average, about 600 due processes are filed. Only about 25 of them on average go to hearing. What does that tell me? That tells me that schools settle, that we come to an agreement before we actually go to hearing. However, it's so important that you start to read that case law. So there's the law, right? The law says we're all entitled to a free, appropriate public education. And what does that mean? That means what's the color blue, right? And where that law is interpreted is in case law. So that's what you want to look up. So there's a very important case about compensatory education that I know about. And it was from 2017. The Somberg family versus Utica Community Schools was the defendant. The school would be the defendant because you're the one filing. So you go to the state's website and you pull up Michigan. Hello, all the Michiganians. Michigan, I don't know how you say it. So anyway, no, they are. So this is the state report for 2017. It tells you how good they did in state testing, services. One of the things that you should find out is how many due processes are filed in your state. How many mediations are filed in your state? Is your state a special ed friendly state? Is it not, right? And so I go in here and I found the due processes, and then I get the docket number. That's the number that the due process board in your state assigns them a number, a docket number, case number, and I just pull it up. It's all public record. So this was the Somberg family versus Utica Community Schools, and the opinion and order denying motion for relief of judgment, overruling objections, and implementing compensatory education plan, right? So they overruled, this is at the federal level, right? For the state education agency lost to the parent. At the state level, they said, yes, he's due 1,200 hours of special education tutoring, right? And of course, the school district, they appealed that, right? So they appealed it at the federal level, the circuit court, I'm sorry. And at that court, the hearing officer, the judge stayed the ruling. And so it gives you a little bit of background. It tells you how in love they were. And then it just gets right down to it. One of the great things about reading these is you can see ways in a case the parents lost, Because when a parent files on something, let's say a parent files on, we're due compensatory education for Billy Smith because the agency's decisions were predetermined. Well, you have to prove that. So it will say in the order whether or not they prove that, right? So you'll see where parents miss it, and you'll see where schools miss it. So it just goes on to say the special master confirmed the district's position that the parents' unilateral decision to remove the student from the district in October 2015 and place him in private left the parties and the special master unable to determine whether the students experienced an educational loss arising from or relating to 2002 IEP. And it just gets into it. It's so good. And it tells you what the award is. And so those awards are in compensatory time. So this case was 1,200 hours of compensatory time. That's a lot of compensatory time. So we have to think about, is that punitive? How old is this child? If your child's a junior and they have one more year at school, I don't know when you're going to do 1,200 hours of compensatory time, right? It's like a lot of therapy. We just give it. So you want to look at, is there a meaningful benefit? Is there a harmful effect? I've had decisions that will be delivered over 6 years. I've had decisions that will be delivered over 2 years. 2 years is usually the average. Just depends on what we're talking about, the severity of it. So again, when you're doing comp ed considerations, we're going to look at that after the first grading period. We're not going to just, I'm here, it's first day of school, I like some comp ed, right? And be careful what you agree to. I've had a lot of families agree to compensatory education in ESY right now. And while there's no usually harmful effect from ESY, we don't know what the compensatory education need is going to be because the student hasn't returned to an educational setting. So be careful what you agree to. So again, remember these 3 points. 3 points. Number 1, compensatory education, it must be individualized to each student. You can get the U.S. Department of Education has provided questions and answers providing services to children with disabilities during the coronavirus disease outbreak. Remember, you missed about 17,500 minutes of education. You just did. Number 2, the amount of compensatory education a student needs may not necessarily be hour per hour or replacement of the services, right? So it might be something different. He might now need counseling as a related service because he wasn't delivered his psych services. He might need a social skills class because he wasn't delivered his speech language pragmatic goals, right? So it may not necessarily be the same thing, but again, we're trying to do what? To put the student in the position he would have been had the IDEA violation not occurred, okay? And then last but not least, an IEP team and the 504 team have got to consider whether the student made progress and how the student made progress. Whether the student made progress and how, right? So those are the components that I want you to remember. We'll get that handout to you guys tomorrow night. And then tomorrow, part 4 of 4, we're going to talk about how to figure out what compensatory education will be appropriate. We'll go over some imaginary cases and things that I might ask my clients, my families to consider as appropriate compensatory education. So we just had a ruling come back and we were delivered minute for minute, almost 700 hours of compensatory education. Well, the student has a long time to be in school. I mean, there were many, everything has specific parameters because your child is specific. So remember, we're doing this for one reason, successful student outcomes. That's what we care about. When we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody. So keep sending us your questions. We're going to keep training so that you guys can be the special education boss when you go back into your IEP 504 meeting. If you need anything, let us know. If you want to drop us a question in the queue, we're happy to answer that or on the Facebook page, Special Education Boss Facebook page. Or you can just shoot us an email to Karen@specialeducationboss.com. And remember, we get it right for those kiddos. We get it right for everybody. And don't, as my husband says, do not cross the boss. All right, we'll see you in the next video.